What we're going to be looking at today is integrating Cinema 4D coordinates from clones and putting them into After Effects, being able to access them in After Effects. So when you look at our phony television episode identification here, we have the falling balls, which we're going to be doing in Cinema 4D, but we also have trailing effects that we are going to do in After Effects. So we need to be able to figure out how we're going to get the data of those cloned balls into After Effects. I'm going to show you how. So we're going to start in Cinema 4D, and very quickly we'll just create a sphere. We'll make it, let's say, 30 centimeters. And I'm going to bring in some materials I created earlier, and I created these materials in Photoshop very quickly, just choosing some random colors, putting the liquefy filter on them and swirling it around to create a sort of marble effect when it gets wrapped onto our spheres. So I've imported them here, and just quickly how I brought them in is in the luminance channel. I took the texture and loaded in with a load image texture, and I turned on environment, and I've included this environment from Grayscale Gorilla's HDRI Studio Pack to create these glass reflective effects on there to make it look more like a marble. And I did 4 of these textures, brought them in, so we have our 4 textures here. So we want to duplicate our sphere 3 more times and apply each material to each separate marble. Because now what we're going to do is open mograph, cloner, and we're going to drop all these spheres into the cloner. Select the cloner. We're going to change the mode from linear to grid array. And we'll change the count on the X to, we just want 2 columns in the X, we want 12 high, and just 1 on the Z. And now we need to separate them out, so we'll go minus 65, minus 700, and 125. So there we have a column of our various different marbles, our 4 different models, all stacked up. Good to go. So we want to raise this up above the floor plane here. I'm going to raise it up in my coordinates to, say, 1190. And that brings us up above the floor. We're going to create a floor object. Bring it below the stack here. And now we're going to add some simulation tags to our objects so that we can get them to drop onto the floor. So with the floor selected, go to Tags, Simulation Tags, enter a rigid body. We're going to do the same thing with, we'll just do it with the cloner here. We can do it one of 2 different ways. We can select the cloner here, Tags, Simulation Tags, rigid body, and then right click and do Copy Tag to Children. We can do it that way, or we can just select all 4 spheres, tags, simulation tags, rigid body, and it applies to all of them, whichever way you prefer. So now we have the dynamics in place. If we press run, we'll see them drop. Now the problem I have with this is they're going to be dropping into view in a column before they collide. And I don't really want that. I want some more randomization. So select the cloner, go to mograph, effector, random effector, and that random effector will automatically be applied to these clones. Now when we run it, you're going to see some collision before they fall down, which is fine because then it's going to be a lot more scattered once they drop down. So that's looking good. Let's create a camera. Now we got a camera in place. Let's go to the view and let's see what it's going to look like from the camera view. And that's looking good. I'm going to open up our timeline to be 300 frames, make it 10 seconds because we're working at 30 frames a second on this. And so we can see a little bit more of the rolling away off the plane. Okay, that's looking good. I like you know, they are bouncing a little more than they would if they were actual marbles. There's a little bit too much bounce to it. But we don't mind it being a little more animated since we're not trying to make this a real world simulation. It's more of the effect that we're after. So there we go. We've got the effect we're after. We did it fairly quickly. We can render this out. We can turn off the floor, the visibility of the floor, and render this out, and we'll be able to use that in our final piece. But we want to make a copy of this project, and I'm going to label this data. Because what we're going to do is we're going to replace all of these marbles with nulls. In order to get the coordinates of each one of these different clones into After Effects so After Effects can read it, they either have to be lights or clones. After Effects cannot read coordinates of objects that you import. So how do we turn these objects, all these individual marbles, into nulls? Let's go through that step now. So the next thing we want to do is select a cloner and hit the C key, and then expand open the hierarchy, and we'll see that all of our marbles now have their own geometry. Instead of it being the original 4 spheres and clones being made of them, we now have actual geometry for every one of the clones. And at this point, what I'll do is I'm going to select the cloner and duplicate it. I always like to have a backup. I'm going to turn its visibility off. You'll see that even though its visibility is turned off, its effect on the simulation will still be present. So now when we run the animation is totally different, because this set of clones, which we are seeing, are still going to be colliding and being affected by the clones we're not seeing. That's fine just temporarily, because we'll be able to avoid that in just a second. What we can do actually is just turn off or just delete these simulation tags. We're keeping our setup for now. Now when we run it, we have back to our original animation. We can apply those tags to that later on. But I just like to keep that as a backup. Okay, so we've got our cloners here that we're viewing. Now we want to be able to take all of the data from each one of these geometric spheres and access the coordinates from them. We want to turn them into nulls so that nulls can be taken into After Effects and read. So how do we do that? Well, let's go to our timeline. We'll change, under the View menu, we'll go to Automatic Mode to select it. We will select all of our marbles, drop them into the dope sheet. Let's set this back to 0. And with all of them selected, go to Function, Bake Objects. Now in this dialog box, leave everything the same. Make sure that Create Copy is turned off. We don't want to add additional copies for all of these. We are going to bake these actual objects. Say OK, it runs through, and there we have created keyframes for each one of our objects. Now we can turn off or delete the simulation tags for all those items. Now when we run it, we have the exact same animation, but each one of these now has keyframes. You can see the motion paths of each of the items. That is data that we can use and we can pull into After Effects to do some tracing. That's what we're after. But we still need to turn these into nulls so After Effects can see them. And how we do that, let's select a null right now, create a new null. I'm going to turn the camera off. I want to get a better view of where I am. We want to create this null to have it in the same place as where all of these spheres started. And they started at the coordinate of their parent, this cloner here, which is 1190 above the floor. So select our null in the Y, 1190. Now I can duplicate this null as many times as I need to replace these spheres. Now we're going to replace each of these spheres with a null. Select the first. We're going to go to Character, Commands. I'm going to click up here to create a floating window because I'm going to access Replace With all the time. So with our first marble selected, Replace With, point to one of the nulls. And you'll see that has now replaced the geometric sphere with a null. And that null is following that exact same coordinate path animation. I'm going to continue to do that for all the rest of the marbles here. Select the marble first, hit replace with, select one of the nulls, and keep going down the line until we get them all done. And there we go. All of our marbles, the geometrics of our marbles, have been turned into nulls with all the coordinates in place. So if we select all of our nulls, you can see we have the motion paths already in place. And you can see the simulation is working fine. So now we still need one more step in order to get all of these coordinates that we want to access in After Effects. We still have one more step we need to do, and that is to select all of our nulls, go to Tags, Cinema 4D Tags, and put on an external compositing tag. We're going to leave it at the default. It's going to create the anchor point in the center. It's not going to create a solid. When we bring this into After Effects, we'll be able to see these coordinates. So now we're in After Effects, and I've got a composition here that's 1920 by 1080, and I've named it Marbles Sunday at 8. It's going to be the first version of this identification, and we'll be able to build off of this one. So I've also imported our Data Cinema 4D project. Just going to import, select the Cinema 4D project, and importing it. And remember, it's the data project, not the full render one we did first. So this is the one that has all the nulls in it. So let's drag that into our composition. And one thing I wanted to note, make sure that when you save the project, you save it with the camera view turned on. Save it with the camera view turned on, not with it turned off, because it would import at this angle. So turn the camera view on and we'd be good. So when it imports, it brings it in wireframe. It also loads the Cineware effect into our effects palette. What we want to do is go to the bottom, hit extract, and this will pull all the usable elements out of the scene. As we can see in our composition, it has created the camera that was used because we had selected the Cinema 4D camera, and it has brought in all of the nulls that we created. You can see now that those animation paths are now in place, the same as we see here. We now have access to all that data. Now you may find it runs a little slow because there is a keyframe for every single frame for position, scale, and the 3 rotation axis points. So it does take a bit of computing power, particularly if you have all of the nulls selected. So just be aware of that in this particular instance. We don't need to have the Cinema 4D visible. Let's keep it at the bottom, but just turn it off. And we can see when we do a RAM, when we just scrub through, we're seeing those nulls are giving us the data that we're going to need. Now let's import the rendered file, and we'll bring it into the bottom of the stack. And this is rendered out as a sequential PNG file because I needed to have access to alpha. So we rendered it with alpha so that we can put any background we want underneath it. So now when we scrub through, we can see our nulls are exactly following our different marbles. So that's working great for our purposes. So we want to be able to now create some trails for each one of these marbles. And how we're going to do that is we're going to use Trapcode particular to create the line. So let's work on the first one. So I want to create a new solid. Doesn't matter what the color is for now because we're going to be replacing it with particular. Let's go to my effects. Let's go to particular. I'm going to solo this just for now so I can set up the look that I want. Now before we get into creating the actual look, I want to attach the position of my particular emitter to the position of this null. So let's select the position of this null, access these keyframes, and I want to access the position of the emitter here. So let's twirl down to get into a particular here. Go to the emitter, and I want the position, and I want to pick whip, create an expression, pick whipping the position of the emitter to the position of that particular marble. Now we can see that the default particular follows the position of that null. So now all we need to do is make it look more like a trail. So let's turn velocity down to 0 on all the settings of velocity. And we're going to increase the particles per second to, say, 750. So now we're creating a line. So when we do a RAM preview, we can see that we're drawing a line in 3D space based on that motion path. So with a little more refinement, what we can do is go into the particle, and I want to change size over life. Now I don't have access to the graph in the composition, so I'll go over to the effect palette and under particle, twirl down size over life, and there is a preset for it to start out with 100% size, and it goes to 0 at the end of its life. Right now the life is too long. Let's reduce the life cycle of this particular particle down to, say, 0.3, something short. Now when we run this, we're getting just a small trail, which is nice. I think it could be a little bit larger, so we can increase the particle size a little bit, say to 15. Now let's just turn on our full render just to see, and we'll place this, actually we'll place the full render up to the top of the stack so that our trails will always appear behind it. And we can do a RAM preview of that to see how it works. Okay, it's a little long. We can fine tune it a little bit more. First of all, I'm going to change the name of this to particular. So when I duplicate this, I know what I'm looking at. I'll also change the color to, say, an orange. Now I know that that is one of my streaks. So I just want to change the life, make it a little bit longer. See what that looks like. And I think I also want to, once it stops most of its move, I want to reduce the particles per second, bring it down. So I'm going to just do random keyframing here down to 0 so that it will die out. That's going to work fine. Now the next thing I want to do is I want to change the color of this, but I better start bringing in my different elements of design so that I can start matching colors. So I'm going to create a background. Nice yellow color. We're going to label this background. And I'll create a floor in a second, but while I'm still here, let's go to particular. Let's open this up. I want to access this color here. So I'm going to choose the background color, but then select it, and I'm going to make it lighter, just so it's a little more integrated. Say OK. Now we can see it's not as garish a look. It's not as striking. It's a little more integrated. I might go a little bit further, just so it's more in keeping with the brand of what we're dealing with here. And that's nice. I like that balance of color. Now that we've got the color selected, what I want to do is, don't forget, we're going to be creating a coming up next, a next week, a tomorrow, the different versions. And each one of those versions is going to be its own color theme. So I want to be able to build this in such a way that the colors can be changed easily. We're going to be doing it with Essential Graphics, but because we're duplicating this particular layer several times, we want to make sure that the color of the trail will be consistently changed across all of them. So what we're going to do is create a new adjustment layer, and I'm going to access the expression controls, and I'm going to put in a color control. I'm going to change this color. I will select this color just to match the color of the trail that we've already created. So let's rename this adjustment layer to be color control. I'm going to lock its effect palette in place, select the particular, twirl down to our color, option click on the stopwatch, pick whip over to the color control from that color control layer we just created. Hit enter. Now whatever we select here is going to change the color of every one of our particulars that we're going to be creating. Now we're ready to duplicate this particular trail layer for all the other spheres. It's going to be the same process. I will duplicate this particular layer. Let's just raise it above the next one we're going to work on. Turn off our soloing for now. And we can turn on soloing for the two we're going to be working with. So now we're going to be dealing with this motion path. Select particular. I'm going to hit EE, and that brings up the expression of this position. Hit P for the position of this marble. Pick whip the position of the particular to the position of that sphere. Hit enter, and now we'll see that it too has the trail. And we'll have to play with the timing of when the particles per second end based on each particular marble. They'll be a little bit different for each one. But that's just a simple case of just moving these keyframes to where it looks appropriate. So I'm going to go through and do the same thing for all of the rest of them. So there we go. We can see we've got all of the trails following all of our marbles. Now there's some adjustment we probably want to make in terms of the lifespan because they're all dying out at the same time. But we did the keyframes, if you recall, for the particles per second, which we can adjust on an individual basis so they all don't die out at the same time. Some balls are running longer than others, that sort of thing. So let's bring in a few of our elements for the identification. Okay, so I created a quick floor for our composition here. It's just basically another solid with a ramp applied to it. Selecting our background color at the bottom and ramping it to a slightly darker version of it. Just gives the illusion of a floor. So now we have a floor for our marbles to bounce upon. I'm going to shut off the visibility of our nulls now. We don't need to see them at this point, so let me just... And there we go. And we can do further refinements and adjustment as we need. What we could also have done too is if at this point, if we decided, you know what, now that we see everything all together, we're not happy with the thickness of the trails, we could create a, we called this color control. Why don't we just call it controller for now, because we're going to adjust, we're going to add in a new one here. Let's go to the expression controls. Let's create a slider control. And I'm going to lock this in place again. And this is going to control the size of the trail. We'll just call it size for now. So we press UU, and that will show us all the properties that we have changed in particular. And we did change the size. So I'm going to option click on the size, pick whip it to this slider control. And you can see we had originally set it at 15. I don't think we want it any larger than that. So, and we let go. Now we can see, let's solo this property and see, and you see that we can't see it right now because the slider control is set to 0. Let's set it to 15, and that is the size that we originally started with. And there we can see it. If we twirl down the slider, we can see we can have a lot of control, make it as large as we like or small as we like. We're not going to go above 15, so we can right click on the slider itself, edit value, and we're going to change the value to 15 because we know we're not going to be larger than 15. So now this slider goes from 0 to 15. Now we have access to make it smaller if we choose. Let's put this one to 15. And we can do the same thing. I'll unsolo this. We can do the same thing for all the rest of the particulars. Anyway, that's something you can play with and fine-tune to get the look that you want. I think one other thing I'd like to do with this is to create some impact points on the floor. So when they land on the floor, there is some sort of interaction with the floor. So if we create just a pre-comp here, just a 500 by 500 pre-comp, have a shape layer, just do a quick little animation on it such as this. Doesn't matter the color right now because we can do an essential graphics on this color and be able to change it much the same way we did with our expression controls. So let's bring that circle in. We're going to turn it into a 3D layer, and we're going to rotate it on the x-axis to -90 so it looks like it's on the floor. And we can adjust its position in space to how we need. Now we find those impact points of each of our balls. Go to the particular frame that you want to have the impact appear. That would be about the point that it, yes, that's it right there. So we can bring let's take this to a point where it does the impact. You see it bounces twice. So we can hit the first bounce, and what I'm going to do is I can leave it called circle, but I want to have this a different color that will stand out for me. Something brighter. Yellow will work. So we have the first bounce, and then it does a second bounce here. So let me just trim this layer though until it isn't there anymore. There we go. I'm just going to trim that up. Let's go back to the second bounce. There's the second bounce there. Just duplicate it. And because it's not as much of an impact, I might reduce its scale down to say 30. Move it into place. So now we get the effect of it actually interacting with the floor. And of course we can just go ahead and do that for all the rest of them. So there we've created all the impact animations for the floor. Now looking at this, I might decide to change the color of the impact or the opacity anyway. So we can quickly do that by going into the pre-comp, because all of these impact points we had in our pre-comp. So go to the pre-comp and we can just select opacity, drop it down by 50%, and let's see what that looks like. So now it's not quite as vivid. Gives the same sort of effect, but it doesn't overtake the scene. Now you can also see that there's certain elements of these trail elements that are ending too soon. We can certainly get in and adjust their life. Remember, we had the keyframes for the particles per second, and that's why some of these are ending early. So we can just locate the particular trail that we want to affect and just move its keyframes accordingly. So that's how you integrate Cinema 4D clone data into an After Effects project. Hope you enjoyed this tutorial. See you next time.